My good friend uh, Kazuma Hashimoto, Justice Kazi over on Twitter, and also on Twitch, has been playing a lot of Genshin Impact, and as have a lot of people. Now, you might be thinking, "Wow, newsworthy, right?" Well, the other day he was playing through the game, and he was using the in-game chat to and mentioned Hong Kong and Taiwan, and the game actually censors the words Hong Kong and Taiwan, um, and as a result, he's no longer supporting the game, and I support him in that decision. Um, and a lot of people that got a lot of people asking, well, why is that? Why does why are these words censored? It seems so nonsensical, um, and it's kind of shocking, right? Because this is America. We're against censorship. Um, well, it turns out that uh, a America does censor games, but in a different and market-driven way, whereas China censors games for political ends. Um, where and to clarify, that market-driven way is also for political ends, but in a different way. So basically, the developer of Genshin Impact, MiHoYo, is based in China, so it's a Chinese developer, and China has laws against like basically anything that might threaten its national unity. And what that might mean is actually very, very broad. And so that's why a lot of so many stories here in the US kind of center on their censorship. Because it is so broad, many things wind up being affected by these laws. Um, and of course, in the view of the Chinese government's eyes, both Taiwan and Hong Kong are rightfully part of China. And so, talking about either of these areas as if they are separate entities or independent entities represents a threat to their national unity. In that's their view on it. Um, and so there are actually a number of banned words in chats, um, and like there is a lot of ambiguity for stuff that is made in China and then sent out of China. So, um, for example, a lot of this is why localization exists, and not just for China, but for like Japanese games coming to the United States. The translations of those games, the English versions, the North American versions, have slightly different content and tweaks that than you will find in like the Japanese version if it's made by a Japanese developer, and that's because localization teams are in charge of like changing that stuff to better fit the market, right? The given market that they're trying to sell the game in, and uh, that isn't particularly considered censorship. So it does drastically change the context of a game when, for example, the age of consent is 16 in Japan, it's 18 in the United States. And it's also 18 in a lot of different areas of Japan, but it's why often you will find 16-year-olds in like Japanese JRPGs or whatever, or like Fire Emblem. Um, and then they get aged up for a US release. So that's one example. Um, and so for when it comes to China, a lot of games have a Chinese version and a like what's called a global version, like something that goes out to the rest of the world. Um, Now, this isn't a new phenomenon. It's been happening for a long time. Basically, ever since China like opened its market and started getting more into commercial releases of video games. So it's not particularly surprising that this is happening. This is uh, Chinese governmental policy clashing with freedom of expression, right? Now, I do want to point out that similarly, there are a lot of similar things in U.S. entertainment. So, similar to how China tends to censor its art or expression, the U.S. does the same through less direct means. So, what do I mean by that? So, like, for example, if you want to have military equipment or military uniforms in your movie, you have to get the say-so from the U.S. government, which means the U.S. government then has input in how the U.S. government is portrayed in that film. Um, and similarly with cops, one of the large reasons that we have such overwhelmingly positive versions of cops in our television and movies is because movie industries and television studios will have to work with police departments to get authentic looking police equipment and police uniforms and maybe even like shooting locations, stuff like that. And basically, like you can actually go back and like look at shows that were made before these partnerships started happening, and police were depicted as like buffoonish oafs. Like even if you look at Brooklyn Nine-Nine, um, the there is that weird dissonance between the political time we're living in and like its constant positive portrayal of cops as like effective investigators and like problem solvers when that's not maybe not necessarily as true to life, right? Like even though it's a comedy show, there are still a lot of elements that are very positive about cops. And even in our media, when cops break the law or you know beat a suspect or you know whatever, they get like a stern oh that's bad, but ultimately usually the narrative shows them to be in the right or people just continue treating them as they normally would like an episode later. So like we have these implicit systems in place in the US. It's just enforced through capitalism and monetary incentives. Um, the same way, like you know, there's no law against kneeling at a football game, but like and there's no like policy, official policy about kneeling at a football game, but the United States government paid to have football games be patriotic on like in the NFL, and so kneeling during a football game when like the national anthem is being played um, can come across to many people as being uh, anti like you know unpatriotic, even though the action was specifically done as to be as respectful as possible to raise attention around a very serious issue. Um, the perception of it as being unpatriotic basically had its own subtle way of shifting the conversation and you know shaping how we talk about these things. Um, so when you hear people talking about government censorship, we have that directly in the case of like movies that have military equipment that then the U.S. government has a direct say in what happens in the film or the television show or what have you. And we also have it through less direct means through like culture and um, other things like that, emanating from the power of the government. Uh, and China does a lot of the same things, and to a larger extent and more explicitly. And that manifests in a wide variety of ways. And in this case, it manifests in censoring the names of two places that it views as part of its main body that do not largely. There are large chunks of the population in Hong Kong that do not consider themselves Chinese, and there are large chunks of the population, probably most of the population in Taiwan, that doesn't consider themselves Chinese. So it's a complicated issue, but I also don't want to pretend like the United States. I know we like to rah rah rah. Our freedom of speech is paramount here, but we also, to a large extent, a larger, more subtle extent, exercise a lot of the same prerogatives in things. By the way, this extends also to video games with realistic hardware. So, like Call of Duty. Like, did you ever think it's kind of weird how like most of the Call of Duty games are pretty pro America, and it's a global brand. Um, not even one that is relatively critical of U.S. foreign policy in there. In fact, maybe it was Black Ops 2 that had like Venezuela stealing a nuclear space weapon that the U.S. developed. Some like incredible justifications to paint the U.S. military in positive lights in video games that use realistic hardware. So the U.S. doesn't have its hands clean of this type of behavior either. It's just unfortunate that one of the more popular games that is out right now happens to be under the thumb of that kind of oppression. China censors America, and America goes for a more propaganda route. Yeah, it's true. The thing is, I suspect that over time China will become more like the United States in these regards. Um, they'll get better at being subtle about it, but for now it's very explicit. Um, and the thing is, like, China is growing as an imperial power, like a modern imperialist state. They're doing a lot of work in Africa to foster connections and infrastructure that will benefit them in 20, 30, 40 years. Whereas the United States isn't doing nearly as much. So in a lot of ways, they're actually ahead of where the United States is, as like in building itself up in the future as being this uh, hegemonic world power. So um, yeah, neither of these censorships are good. Um, but we also shouldn't pretend that US video games are free from, spreading the ideology of the state.